this is cutting fabric take 2. Now, when you first start out with your piece, Bee didn't iron the entire thing because we knew we just needed a small portion of it from cutting this other piece. But what
there's a little bit of
That's
starch.
okay, because we're not going to use that part. This part's nice and flat, though, and it's actually a little bit stiffer because it has the starch in it, which makes it a little easier to cut than the part that doesn't have anything in it. Now, you're going to square up the end of your fabric, and by squaring up, that means that you're going to make the edge completely straight. You can see here where it was cut at the store that it's not actually completely straight. If you tried to finagle it so it's straight, there's part missing here. If you put it this way, there's too much over here, so you just have to straighten it up. Now, try to do that as conservatively as possible so that you have more fabric. You don't want to waste it cutting it. Now, some people like to cut by putting their hand here and cutting the first part, and then moving their hand up here and cutting the second part, which is perfectly fine. I prefer to cut it just leaning over and holding my entire arm on it, so to hold it in place. You just cut straight down. Then I always just pick it up like that with my finger. And now I have a completely straight edge right here that when you're quilting, you want to make sure everything is straight and exactly measured so it's perfect. Now I'm going to flip my ruler around.
Almost perfect.
Almost perfect. And nothing can be perfect. Okay.
Except for what Jesus makes.
Okay.
He's
So
the only person who can be perfect.
now you are going to measure 2 inches. So I'm going to line up my 2 inches with that perfect edge right there. And it is nice to have kind of a table that you can walk around because now I just orient my body the other direction. Put my hand all the way down flat on it with my arm to anchor it in place. And this time I'm going to cut all the way up the ruler, pull my piece off, and it's a perfect 2-inch strip all the way down. I'll put it in my pile.
Let me show.
Okay, so now we have 2 strips that we made. And we also have our little sticky note right here, and it's nice to keep track, especially if you have a couple projects going. So now we have our 2-inch strips done, and we're good to go on that. Okay, now the next part right here, Bee, is you're going to need a pair of 3.5-inch squares. So what I'm going to do, since this edge is perfectly straight right here, I'm going to line up my 3.5 with it, and then I'm going to bring the ruler down to about 7.5 inches, because 3.5 plus 3.5 is 7. That gives me a little bit of wiggle room in case I have a bad cut. I'm going to go ahead and cut out a rectangle that is 3.5 inches by about 7.5 inches. Perfect. Now,
Can I sit here?
I'm just going to flip my
legs are
fabric
tired.
over because this is the straight edge. This edge was never squared up. And I'm going to cut 2 3.5-inch squares. 1 and 2. And now we have a pair of squares. Add it to our
Rainy,
pile.
watch out. I'm trying to show the pile.
Check it off. Now, the next thing that we need is just one more
trying to
3
get the thing in it.
by 3 or 2 3.5-inch squares. And Bee's going to go ahead and cut this one.
I couldn't get it right.